What is the best part about you going to your father's games? Is it the food? Is the popcorn? Is it watching LeBron? What you got, Mac?
I got a question for you.
LeBron!
LeBron, of course, LeBron.
Through all I've been through, I just, I just always just kept going, kept getting in the gym, kept believing in God, believing in my faith, having my faith strong in everything, and just knew at the end of the day, this is my story, and this is just what it is. And my job is just to keep pushing, keep grinding, and whatever happens, happens.
Welcome to SI Now. Of course, that was Isaiah Thomas and his son who had the right answer. I'm Robin Lundberg. She's Madeline Burke. And Madeline, IT finally returned to the court to make his first appearance as a Cleveland Cavalier.
Yeah, Isaiah made his long-awaited debut at the Q, 17 points, 3 assists in 18 minutes on the floor. And he didn't look hesitant at all. His first offensive possession was an assist. Didn't waste any time getting a technical. How encouraged were you, Robin, by what you saw last night?
Very encouraged, because when you're dealing with the kind of injury that he did, there was some concern that he wouldn't be the same player. He looked a little rusty to me off the dribble. He wasn't going to the hole with reckless abandon. There's a couple times he lost the ball in that situation. But what was very revealing, this is a guy who can score, right? Yeah. We know he'll get that back with rhythm, but he scored almost 30 points a game a year ago. And he was the focal point of opposing teams' defenses. You could see it immediately in this game that he is going to flourish given the situations that they're not going to be able to double team him. And he's a natural-born scorer on top of being a spot-up shooter. He's not just somebody who can get his own. He'll be able to play off the ball as well.
And, I mean, you see him on the floor with LeBron James, who draws a lot of attention, with D. Wade, which was fun to watch those two on the floor. But what is the impact of his return having on the Cavs? I mean, obviously, Derrick Rose is going to be returning to health soon. And how does it affect this team? Well,
it's a massive upgrade. I mean, this is a team that had Derrick Rose at the beginning of the year and then Jose Calderon playing point guard. So you add Isaiah Thomas, that is putting you up in the upper echelons offensively. Now, as far as defense, that's still a huge concern, especially when the Golden State Warriors are the team at the top of the totem pole. And it's really not fair. You're kind of like, all right, how do they compare to the Warriors? Well, nobody can compare to this super monstrosity of a team. But the offensive team the Cavs can put out there is going to be as good as anyone, and they're deeper than they were a year ago because they added Dwayne Wade, who's played very well and led that bench. They added Isaiah Thomas. They added Jay Crowder. They added Jeff Green. So essentially you traded Kyrie for those four guys.
Yeah, they added those four guys. They did subtract Kyrie, who the IT is not going to be playing in the back-to-back against the Celtics tonight. I think one thing I do want to see, though, is how Isaiah evolves and plays as the season goes on. I mean, obviously his first game back after 7 months was impressive. We did see some spots that we liked, but I do want to see more, and I want to see how his body holds up as the NBA season continues. But elsewhere in Ohio, the Cincinnati Bengals have signed head coach Marvin Lewis to a 2-year contract extension, keeping him in through 2019. Now, Lewis just finished his 15th season as head coach in Cincy, as the Bengals ended the season with a 7-9 record. It's the second straight season the Bengals missed the playoffs following 5 straight years in the postseason, all of which resulted in losses in the wild card. Now, Adam Schefter reported that Lewis was planning to leave the Bengals to pursue other opportunities. So was this the right move for him to stay?
I think it was the right move for him to stay. You know, you hear him losing in the playoffs and then them missing the playoffs, and we're so used to overhaul and change at the head coaching position. But what's wrong with keeping Marvin Lewis around? You just mentioned it. 5 straight playoff appearances. How many teams make 5 straight playoff appearances? The guy's record is 125 and 112 over 240 games with the same team. Clearly, he's doing a good job. And there's a phrase, Madeline, I really like, which is, perfect is the enemy of good.
Okay.
And sometimes in search of perfection, you forget that you have it good.
All right, well, a phrase that I like is 80% of success is showing up. But at some point, showing up is not enough. If you're getting to the postseason, that's great. But if you can't win, if you can't show some forward progress, how long is this going to last? Or are they going to just be stagnant and okay with being mediocre?
Well, you can't win the Super Bowl without making it to the postseason.
Right.
Now, I don't know if their failure in the postseason is necessarily a condemnation of Lewis or a coincidence in a sense where they haven't had that overall great team. Because we sit here and we complain about Andy Dalton and we complain about some of the other things. Remember, the Bengals used to be a joke of a franchise and they no longer are. And I think that's in large part due to Marvin Lewis. So I don't mind the consistency and I don't mind sticking with the guy that got you there.
Right, yeah, he made some moves.
Meanwhile, while Marvin Lewis will remain active, one of his former quarterbacks will not, as the Cardinals' Carson Palmer announced his retirement in a letter saying he just knows it is time to hang up his cleats. Palmer finishes with 46,247 yards passing, 294 touchdowns, and 187 interceptions. How will you remember his career?
You know, Carson Palmer, I think, is a statistically impressive quarterback, but he never won a Super Bowl. I mean, he was a Pro Bowl 3 times in his career. And, you know, we got to point out, too, this isn't the first time he retired. The former #1 pick actually retired briefly in 2011 when the Bengals, he asked the Bengals to trade him, and they wouldn't at the time. So he said, all right, I'm going to step away from the game. And then they bet and they traded him.
Didn't quite get the attention, say, Brett Favre.
Right. Not quite there, but he got what he wanted out of it. And he played for, 3 different teams. He had flashes of brilliance. He had 6 seasons of 4,000 passing yards. He was among the league's best when healthy, but also health was an issue for this guy.
I think Carson Palmer is going to be one of those players who winds up properly evaluated.
Yeah.
You know, early in his career, I think he was a little over-evaluated. People
Right.
were anointing him as the next guy. Then he got hurt, and people quickly called him a bum or something along those lines, when he was actually solid.
Yeah.
And I think over the course of his career, you add up the prior to injury status and post-injury status, he's good. Carson Palmer was a good quarterback.
Yeah. He's been overrated. He's been underrated. Now we're going to finish his career where he's rated.
Meanwhile, very good is Nick Saban, and his team is in the national championship game, yet he still found a reason to complain. Saban lamented only having 7 days between the semifinals and the title game, saying, someone has to think about the players and not what's convenient for the media or TV. Does he have a case?
No, absolutely not. Nick Saban, how quickly they forget. This is the schedule in the regular season, too. You play Saturday, and then you play the following Saturday. And the difference in the college football playoffs is the players, the students, they're on winter break. So they don't have classes to get to in between. And also, Alabama played on Monday, and they're playing the following Monday. Georgia played on Monday. They're playing the following Monday. Both teams are coming into this with 7 days in between the games, 7 days of preparation. I think that he's making a lot out of nothing.
It seems like a function of his personality that he has to find something to be upset about. I would love to see a collage of Nick Saban doing activities like water skiing and on roller coasters and the like, because the guy never seems happy. His team has annual success. They almost have a residency in this game. Why bring this up now? What's the difference? You've been able to thrive in this system. And yes, as you mentioned, the only time it's different is going between the end of the regular season and right now. This is just par for the course as the season would be. And the season's very high leverage in college football. 2 losses can essentially knock you out of the playoffs, even 1 depending on season and schedule. So I don't think this is some sort of drastic departure or something to make note of.
Yeah, it's never enough for Nick Saban. He's the kind of get off my lawn kind of guy. But he is a very successful coach, very successful in the football world. And hey, the Pro Football Hall of Fame finalists for the class of 2018 have been announced, headlined by Ray Lewis, Randy Moss, Terrell Owens, and Brian Urlacher. Now, it seems the consensus is that Ray Lewis is a sure thing, but should he be more of a lock than these other guys?
No, I don't think so. I think these guys are locks, all 3 of them, if you're mentioning Lewis, Randy Moss, and Terrell Owens. And they're all near the top of their position, all-time locks. So I'm not dismissing Ray Lewis or saying he shouldn't be a lock for the Hall of Fame. That's asinine. He's obviously a lock. One of the best linebackers of all time. You could make the argument the best. I would probably still favor Lawrence Taylor, but he's right in that mix for GOAT status. But so are Randy Moss and Terrell Owens. In fact, if you're telling me to rattle off the 3 best receivers I've ever seen, Rice, Moss, and Owens are right there. Moss, the best deep vertical threat perhaps of all time, and T.O., this freak in the sense of the kind of guy who could go over the middle and rack yards after the catch. So that's the kind of rarefied air all of these guys are in it, and I don't understand why Moss and T.O. seem to be devalued a little bit. I guess it's histrionics or attitude or whatnot.
Well, and receivers, I think, too, have a harder time. But Randy Moss, he's second all-time in touchdown receptions. I mean, admittedly, he's my favorite football player of all time. Number 84 in your program's number 1 in my heart. Mm-hmm. Randy Moss is a Hall of Famer in my eyes. But first year on the ballot, Randy Moss, Brian Urlacher, do not have something that Ray Lewis does, which is a Super Bowl ring. Ray Lewis has 2 of them and a Super Bowl MVP, and I think that does make a difference when you're considering guys. Then guys like Terrell Owens, too, you know, his personality. I think the NFL is more of a buttoned-up league, and I think sometimes people are hesitant to vote guys like that in the first or second try. I think all of these guys are a lock to get in. Now, first ballot, I think Ray Lewis is a lock first ballot. Randy Moss should be. Brian Urlacher should be, spending his entire career with the Bears. But will they? We'll see.
I guess the Super Bowl is a tiebreaker, and if you think of the Ravens during that era, you think of defense first. The first player you think on that defense is Ray Lewis. However, it's very fickle to bring it just to Super Bowls because Randy Moss is David Tyree away from a Super Bowl. I mean, yeah. he almost caught a pass after that play to win that Super Bowl. Terrell Owens returned from injury to have a great Super Bowl against the Patriots. So I think we're being a little bit too focused on that if we're trying to punish these guys by making them wait for the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. The history books, though, the Super Bowl things, if somebody's looking at the stats, that's what they see.
While some NFL teams are preparing for the playoffs, most are getting ready for the NFL draft. To get ahead of that, we welcome in Albert Breer of the MMQB, who comes to us courtesy of Toyota. Let's go places. Let's start with the big question, Albert. Who goes #1 overall?
Well, I think we have to wait to see who comes out. My perception, at least right now, is that it's going to be a quarterback because that's what the Browns general manager, John Dorsey, has said is going to be a focus. And so I think when you look at who's going to go in the first round, there are really 4 quarterbacks that are going to be in play. Again, assuming they all come out. Baker Mayfield, who's a senior, who's definitely coming out. Josh Allen, a junior at Wyoming, who has said that he's coming out, who's already declared. And then the other 2 that we're waiting on now are potentially the top 2 picks in the entire draft, and that's UCLA's Josh Rosen and USC's Sam Darnold. So I think there's a good chance a quarterback goes #1. In fact, I think there's a good chance that we see quarterbacks go 1-2 this year.
All right, well, you said 1 and 2, but, you know, with the top 3 picks being the Browns, Giants, and Colts, could all top 3 be quarterbacks this year?
You know, I don't think the third one will be. I think that the Colts feel pretty good about where Andrew Luck is. They had him back in the building last week, and the idea, at least now, is to try to get him in a throwing program in January. And so I would see the Colts probably going with the best non-quarterback, assuming that both the Browns and Giants go with quarterbacks at the top of the draft. And so you'd be looking at players like NC State pass rusher Bradley Chubb or Penn State running back Saquon Barkley there. Now, what could make it so you do see quarterbacks going 1, 2, 3, if Allen, say Allen, Rosen, and Darnold all kill it over the next 3 months, and it looks like they're the top 3 prospects in the draft, then there's a scenario where maybe the Colts could trade out of 3, build up some draft capital for a team looking to come up and get a quarterback. Something like that's not impossible, but if it stays the way it is right now, with Cleveland picking first, the Giants picking second, the Colts picking third, I think there's a good chance quarterbacks go 1, 2, but I don't think a quarterback would go third.
Now, Albert, between Allen, Rosen, and Darnold, who's got the most upside in the NFL?
It's a hard question to answer just because Rosen's the guy who looks like he was born to play quarterback. And probably, if you look at the 3 of them, he's probably the most evolved on the field. He's a guy who can probably step in and play right away. He's got some off-field questions. But as far as what type of player he is, the way he throws the ball, it just looks like he was born to play the position. Josh Allen's the raw athlete. And so Josh Allen's going to take a lot of work. But he's got Big Ben, Cam Newton type of ability as far as his arm strength and his size. And so, you know, where Rosen really looks like the guy who was born to play the position, just a textbook, just textbook the way his delivery is, his mechanics, everything's there right now. Allen's kind of the guy who's, you know, the raw piece of clay, the guy that you can form into something that could be potentially great, but maybe isn't there quite yet. You know, and then Darnold's a guy who needs a lot of mechanical work, but the off-field for Darnold is off the charts. Leadership, poise, a winner, all that stuff is there with Darnold. And so each of these guys have different holes in their game, and really for the teams at the top of the draft, it's going to come down to what do you feel most comfortable working through? Do you feel most comfortable working through Darnold's mechanics? Do you feel most comfortable working through Rosen's off-field problems? Or do you feel most comfortable that you can develop Allen from what he is now to maybe what he could be in 3 or 4 years? Those are the questions we're going to hear asked over the next few months.
Albert, what about Lamar Jackson and Baker Mayfield? Those guys dominated at the college level. How are NFL teams evaluating them?
So I think Baker Mayfield's got a very good chance to go in the first round. I'd be surprised if he didn't go in the first round. I think he could wind up going in the top 10 or 15 picks. Really, the one thing you got to get past with him is size and then some of the off-field stuff. But just as far as his ability to win, his accuracy, his arm talent, his athleticism, it's all there. And so I think Baker Mayfield goes somewhere in the top 15 picks. And he's a great example of a guy who really benefited coming back to school. I think last year he would have been a 3rd or a 4th round pick, and he's really done a lot to help his stock. He's a much better passer in the pocket now than he was a year ago. And so I think he goes somewhere in the first round. Lamar Jackson, I think, probably goes somewhere in the second day of the draft. He's a fantastic athlete, an incredible, incredible runner. He's got instincts as a runner you normally don't see at the quarterback position. But at this point, I know NFL teams look at him as more of a thrower than a passer. His ability to process within the context of a pro offense is something that's going to come into question over the next few months. And so I think Jackson has ability. He's got arm strength and he's got athleticism. He's got to get more accurate. He's got to become a better passer in general. And those are things that, of course, at the NFL level, you need to have. Those aren't, maybe we can work with this, maybe we can't. You have to have those sorts of things. And so, we'll see how he does over the next few months. But certainly I think there are more questions with Jackson right now than there are with Mayfield on the field.
Now, Carson Palmer announced his retirement after 14 years in the league. So Arizona is in the market for a quarterback. Mm-hmm. Who in this class would be the best fit for the Cardinals?
Well, right now, and we're talking about the system they've run for the last 5 years, I think Josh Allen's a perfect fit for them. They've wanted bigger quarterbacks the way their system runs. The quarterback does take hits. He's got to stand in there. And we've seen it with the quarterbacks that Bruce Arians has had, whether it was Ben Roethlisberger in Pittsburgh, Andrew Luck in Indianapolis, or Carson Palmer. You see him there in Arizona. The thing is, Bruce Arians isn't there anymore, so we don't know who the coach is. We don't know who what the offensive system is going to be like. Again, if it's the same offensive system that they've been running for the last 5 years, then Josh Allen will be a perfect fit. But chances are there's going to be some change in Arizona in the way they do things with whoever the new coach is. And so it's really hard to project what Arizona might do at that position without knowing who the coach is.
You mentioned Saquon Barkley earlier. Where do you think he'll go, and is he a surefire NFL success?
I mean, man, you heard Jim Irsay talk the other day about, adding a running back, trying to help Andrew Luck that way. And, 20 years ago, it was Peyton Manning in 1998, and then Edgerrin James came along in 1999. And obviously, Edgerrin helped Peyton's development in his early years as a pro. And so I think the Colts would look at him at number 3. I think he'd be in play that early. Cleveland could take him at number 4 after taking a quarterback first overall. We saw last year how much having a great young running back helped in Dallas. When they were breaking in Dak Prescott, having Ezekiel Elliott there was huge for Prescott. And so Saquon, I think, is going to go somewhere in the top 6 or 7 picks. He's a transcendent talent at the position. Right now, considered probably a better prospect than Ezekiel Elliott was in 2016, a better prospect than Todd Gurley was in 2015. And those guys were considered generational type talents. And so this is a back for the 21st century, a 230-pound guy who can play on all 3 downs, never has to come off the field. I don't think Saquon Barkley is going to last long on that draft board on that Thursday night in April.
Now, Barkley, of course, had a huge performance in the Fiesta Bowl. Reflecting on bowl season, who helped and who hurt their draft stock the most?
Well, I mean, I'd be tempted to say Mayfield hurt his draft stock a little bit because of the way that he played in the Rose Bowl against Georgia. You just watch that game in the second half. Obviously, we saw some of the flaws in the way that he plays. I don't think it's going to hurt him. I don't think it's going to hurt him that much. But I think for some of the teams that may have been down on him a little bit, there's going to be some variance in opinion on him because he's a little bit of an unconventional quarterback. You had some of the things that you'd be concerned about, and that Georgia forced him to operate from the pocket, and he struggled a little bit there. And they were playing a lot of man defense against Oklahoma. He was having to throw into tight windows. He wasn't pulling the trigger quite like he had earlier in the game. So I think there are some questions there you can ask with Mayfield. On the other end, and in that very game, Roquan Smith showed up again, and we've seen this over the course of the year. I think Roquan Smith came onto teams' radar in the middle of the season, as a potential first-round pick. And we saw it in the SEC championship game. We saw it again in the Rose Bowl. I'll bet we see it again in the national championship game. Roquan Smith looks like the type of guy, and maybe he's not Patrick Willis, but he looks like the type of guy you can stick in the middle of your defense and have there as the heartbeat of a unit for the next 10 years. And so I'd expect that teams that need linebackers there, maybe not in the top 10 because that position generally isn't valued like that, but teams that need linebackers maybe somewhere 10 to 20 will look at Roquan Smith, see all these big game performances, and pull the trigger on a guy who, again, could be a heart and soul type player for a defense for the next decade to come.
Thanks, Albert. I'm sure we'll be asking you some of these questions again.
You got it, guys.
Twenty of the 32 NFL teams are already looking ahead to 2018, but what are our expectations for the non-playoff teams come next season? We've got our bold predictions for 2018. Robin, what are you seeing?
Well, I think the Seattle Seahawks, their run as we know them is over with. They missed the playoffs this year, and it points out how much of an anomaly the New England Patriots have been. We don't see that level of sustained success in the NFL at an elite level. The Seahawks were sort of the NFC version, not quite to the level of the Patriots, but they've been really, really good for a really long time. But their identity seems gone now. Rich Sherman got hurt this year. It looks like Cam Chancellor might be done. Offensively, they don't have skill position players around Russell Wilson. The one caveat here is Wilson is so good at being basically a one-man offense, but it's tough in the NFL where you got 53-man rosters to do it. So I think we're going to see a rebuilding period for Seattle.
I mean, yeah, I remember when Earl Thomas ran after some of the Cowboys staffers and said, hey, come get me. So it seems like guys are jumping ship, but this is just the second time in his 8 years in Seattle that Pete Carroll didn't take the Seahawks to the postseason. So are you disappointed they didn't win more?
Absolutely not. I mean, I don't know how anybody could be disappointed unless you're holding them to the highest standard ever, right? They're only a failure by the best ever. As far as individually evaluating them, they've been great. You just mentioned it. They're in the playoffs every year. They're competing for the championship every year. They go to a couple Super Bowls. They win one. I mean, if you're complaining about that, I mean, you hate life. Go check out the Bills fans and ask them if they take what Seattle got.
I think the one way they could have been better is if they had handed the rock to Marshawn Lynch. That's pretty much all they got there.
Some people might look back on that one day, you know?
It's 2020 in there. I think Marshawn will remember that pretty fondly.
What's your prediction?
All right, personally, I think Andrew Luck will never play another full season in the NFL. Now, Luck underwent surgery on his right shoulder, his throwing shoulder, in January. The shoulder he originally injured back in September of 2015, the shoulder which he had a frayed labrum in September of 2016, but played through it for all but one game of the season. Now, as for 2017, he was able to return to practice in October, but he was throwing slowly and tentatively, and then he suffered a setback and didn't play it down in 2017. It's been almost a full calendar year since the surgery. And most injuries that keep guys out for 9-10 months, you're talking career-ending injuries, especially if you're a quarterback and the injury affects your throwing shoulder. So Indy has the number 3 pick in the draft. I'm seeing this team taking a quarterback and moving on.
That would be remarkable because if you think about the trajectory Andrew Luck was supposed to be on, he was anointed as next. I mean, they got rid of Peyton Manning in order to make room for Andrew Luck. So you're saying they'd be doing that again for the next guy. And, you know, it wouldn't be through necessarily fault of his own. But overall, if that were to be the case, I think Andrew Luck would be looked at as a bust career-wise.
I mean, the number 1 overall pick, you get rid of Peyton Manning, who has 2 more Super Bowl appearances in him, 1 more Super Bowl win in him in Denver, and you go with Luck, and you never want to see a guy's career cut short or affected by injury. If he doesn't have the talent, if he doesn't have the mental toughness to make it in the NFL, that's one thing. But if he's a talented guy and if he's got what it takes, but he just gets hurt repeatedly over and over, and something that affects the way he throws the ball, which is what he does in this league, you never want to see a guy hang him up for that.
I'd apologize in advance, but it'd be really bad luck.
The Arizona Wildcats fired head football coach Rich Rodriguez on Tuesday amidst a sexual harassment allegation and a notice that a hostile workplace lawsuit will be filed against the university. Now, Rodriguez spent 6 seasons in Tucson, compiling a 43-35 record. For more, we turn to SI legal analyst Michael McCann. Now, Michael, Rodriguez vehemently denied the allegations of harassment, even reportedly taking a polygraph test to prove his innocence. The accusation was levied by Rodriguez's former administrative assistant, who declined to participate in a university investigation into her claims. In a statement, Rodriguez said, quote, "The university determined that there was no truth to her accusations and found me innocent of any wrongdoing." Now, Arizona, while unable to confirm the allegations, responded saying, quote, "Arizona Athletics did become aware of information both before and during the investigation, which caused it to be concerned with the direction and climate of the football program." Now, Michael, did Arizona have to find anything material to break their contract with Rodriguez and fire him?
Well, it depends on whether he's fired with cause or without cause. Firing him with cause means that he's engaged in some kind of wrongdoing that warrants the ability to the university to not pay him on the remainder of the deal. To fire him without cause, in other words, just breach his contract, they can do that when they choose, but that would require them to pay him the remainder of his contract or whatever liquidated damages terms that they have in it.
Last week, the former assistant who had accused Rodriguez of sexual harassment also filed a $7.5 million notice of claim alleging that Rodriguez ran a hostile workplace. What constitutes a hostile workplace?
Sure, what constitutes a hostile workplace is in part subjective, but the gist of it is that it makes people uncomfortable and puts them in a position where they feel as if they are threatened because of perhaps issues of gender or race, and it's affecting their ability to do work, and it makes them uncomfortable. And this is a serious claim that could potentially lead to significant damages, not only for Rodriguez, but more importantly, at least from the purpose of the plaintiff, would be the school. So the school is certainly mindful of having an environment in place that doesn't lead to individuals feeling as if they are the target of some kind of hostility or discrimination on account of a protected class, whether it is gender or race.
Now, the lawsuit hasn't actually been filed yet. The notice of claim simply signals that it is coming. Is this something Arizona might settle in advance?
It's possible. And the reason why we have a notice of claim here is that it's a public entity. And under Arizona law, there has to be a notice filed before the lawsuit is filed for this type of claim. But to be sure, this is a case that would likely not go to trial. This is a case where the university would be sensitive about a trial and potential even pretrial discovery. They may want to reach a deal with the claimant before any kind of information sharing occurs, because as we know, when emails are shared, sometimes people, when they write emails, are not always in the right mind in terms of saying things correctly. So this is something that the university may want to address long before there's any kind of sharing of information, let alone a trial.
Now, would anything fall on Rodriguez personally here, or is the school strictly to blame?
Probably just the school in terms of his own exposure to liability. That said, if in fact he acted, again, we're assuming that the claims are true for a moment, that he intentionally tried to inflict emotional distress, that would be one potential claim against him. In addition, if he contributed to the workplace, to the hostility of the workplace environment, he could be held liable. But in truth, the lawyers for the claimant are most likely targeting the school because of the school's ability and incentive to strike a deal early.
According to Rodriguez, his former assistant also threatened a $7.5 million lawsuit against him. If he indeed was found innocent by an investigation, could he have legal recourse?
He could, although being found innocent by an internal investigation isn't in and of itself a trial or something of legal significance, right? It's a school that's doing its own investigation, and many have argued that when schools do these investigations, that their incentive is to not find fault, because the finding of fault could expose the university to liability. So that he was cleared, from what we understand, by the university's own investigation, to me, that doesn't eliminate the possibility that he's liable, but he has his own claims. For instance, he could pursue a defamation claim if he felt that his name was being tarnished unfairly. But even there, it can be tricky, because once the legal process starts, comments made as part of that process normally are not subject to defamation claims.
Michael, appreciate your insight as always.
Thank you.
That'll do it for our show today. Of course, we'll be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Eastern In the meantime, make sure to follow SI Now Live for all the latest updates and videos.